Hey everybody, Brett from Love Bats and the Belfry back for another video and a new horror vlog.
Welcome!
And it is opening weekend of Beetlejuice Beetlejuice when I'm recording this, and I'm actually pretty fresh out of the theater recording this. I just got back from seeing the new Beetlejuice Beetlejuice in theaters, and yeah, I don't want to be a super negative person, but I'm just going to lead off with I wasn't a big fan of this movie.
Unjustifiably in a position that I'd rather not be in.
I actually went into this movie with fairly low expectations, and I came out of it still quite disappointed by it. Now, this is a movie that I think a lot of people are going to go see and probably really enjoy it. More casual fans will probably just come out of it being like, that was fun, that was enjoyable. I wouldn't even consider myself a crazy big, insane Beetlejuice fan. I very much like the cartoon. I like the movie a lot, but I wouldn't say I'm like die-hard Beetlejuice fan here. Even then, I wasn't super wild about this movie. It was quite the convoluted movie, I must say. It's funny hearing, like, there's been a lot of press around this movie, and, you know, Michael Keaton and Jenna Ortega and Winona Ryder are, like, doing all these, you know, interviews and saying how much, you know, they enjoyed making this, and even they said, like, at least I remember, like, Michael Keaton said, like, we didn't really want to pull the trigger on a Beetlejuice sequel unless we knew the script was good. And after leaving the theater on this, I was like, you guys could have rewritten that script and made it much, much better. It needed some revision for sure. A lot of this movie had so much plot jammed and crammed into this movie, and then trying to make it all make sense. There was like 4 separate plot lines they could have honestly done like separate movies with, but they decided to take like 4 separate plot lines and throw them all in a blender. And I don't know, like the main part, I'm gonna get all into spoilers of this, so if you haven't seen Beetlejuice Beetlejuice and you plan on going to see it, go see it and come back to this review, because I'm gonna talk pretty in detail about certain things. Feeling like you guys should have just left well enough alone. Then again, you know, capitalism and money, and people love a sequel, you know, to get a good paycheck. So I started off with a negative, so I'll get into some negatives, but I do have a couple positives to say about this movie. Yeah, a big negative is this movie has so much crap crammed into it. The main plot line, honestly, it was hard, like, coming out of this and being like, what was this, like, the actual, like, central plot line? Because this movie, while how crazy it was, I feel like it took a really long time to get going, and it just kept throwing more exposition at you and more, and I'm like, can we, like, get going with the actual story here?
Yeah, no, I'm living in a nightmare.
Yeah, like, the main central plot, I would say, was about Lydia Dietz has a daughter named Astrid, and the dad of Astrid, Lydia Dietz's husband, had ended up passing away due to a boating accident. And so there's that whole plot line. Astrid is basically does not like her mother. Lydia Dietz is now like some television host of like some ghost, like, paranormal show, and a big gripe I have with that, yes, a part of that makes sense, but watching the first movie, I was like, Lydia, like, was really into photography. I feel like Lydia would have been grown up to become like a photographer and not like a television host. So that's a little gripe I had with Lydia's character. And I felt like Lydia's character was very underdeveloped in this movie, and I actually felt that way about a lot of the characters. Astrid, played by Jenna Ortega, a lot of people are having beef with Jenna Ortega because of just overexposure, and I completely understand that. I feel like she's just in everything now, that like people are kind of getting sick of her. But like, she does a good job at this movie, and her character of Astrid, like, I mean, it's Jenna Ortega, so she's basically playing herself as the character of Astrid. But Astrid, yeah, doesn't really like her mother that much, and is kind of resenting Lydia, and, you know, with, the death of her father and everything, and feels like she never really got closure, so she's, this angsty, really angry teenager. But I'm glad they didn't play up like that really all the way. I felt like Jenna Ortega's character was still fairly withdrawn. Like, it was kind of a realistic, like, portrayal as far as, like, an angry teenager goes. Like, it wasn't just these over-the-top scenes of, like, Jenna just, like, yelling at people. So, I was fine with that. And this central plot line would have worked really well because Jenna, like, ends up finding this, one guy, kind of starts developing feelings for him. They both kind of are really into one another. And it kind of goes from there. And this has a lot to do with Astrid and the, like, potential boyfriend of Astrid's, which ends up leading to a lot of the Netherworld or the Underworld. I mean, I like the cartoon a lot, and they always refer to, like, the afterlife as, like, the Netherworld. And so it leads Astrid into the Netherworld. So for the sake of this, I'm just going to say Netherworld. And so Lydia then has this discovery that the boy that Astrid was into killed his family, and then before the cops could get to him, he, like, fell out of his treehouse and broke his neck and died. So he was just cooped up in this house for, like, 20 some years. And then, had this big reveal of that. And so Lydia goes to the Netherworld to basically try and rescue Astrid, because there's this big loophole in the Netherworld that you can trade your soul for another. And basically he just manipulates Astrid into doing this. And if that was just the plot, we would have had a pretty much better movie. But they had to throw... Willem Dafoe was thrown into this movie. Like Willem Dafoe, I'm a big fan of his. But he had nothing to work with in this movie. He plays this actor who was a detective in, like, these detective movies or whatever. And so in the afterlife or the Netherworld, he's an actual detective. He's an actor playing a detective in the afterlife. And he just has this gripe with, getting Beetlejuice. And that's about it. That's his whole character. And I'm sure there's plenty of people on the internet right now who have reviewed this movie. Probably have already mentioned this, but, like, him and Monica Bellucci, also great actress in this movie, has nothing to work with. And those two characters were not needed in this movie whatsoever. They could have taken that out and it would have been fine. There was this other plot line, with the Willem Dafoe character, like, just trying to go after Beetlejuice and, like, get him. Like, that's his whole motivation. Like, get him to then what? Kill him? I don't know. And then Monica Bellucci is Beetlejuice's ex-wife, and we are given some context to this, some little backstory and lore to this, which Michael Keaton as Beetlejuice delivers himself. Yeah, didn't need this plot line whatsoever. Monica Bellucci's character, I think her name was Dolores, like, it's just trying to get revenge on Beetlejuice, and she just kind of comes out of nowhere. You don't really know why she just appears, but she just appears, and then is trying to go after Beetlejuice. So there's those two extra, like, B plot lines, which, yeah, just aren't needed. Take those characters out of the movie plays out the same. And then you have the third, like, major negative to this movie is Justin Theroux's character as Lydia's boyfriend. Justin Theroux, like, I like in a lot of stuff. I hated him in this movie. And not because of just, like, he is a character you're supposed to not like, but I really, like, there's characters, especially villains in movies, where it's like you love to hate them. And he's just one of these people, I'm like, get out of this movie. This guy sucks. He's not charming. He's not funny. He's just a terribly written character. And this is, like, Lydia's boyfriend or whatever. This whole thing with, Justin Theroux's character and Lydia Dietz, like, he proposes to Lydia at a funeral, at her father's funeral, like at this wake where everyone is. Like, one, it's just like that plot line also is not needed in this movie. You could have just had Lydia as single in this movie. It would have worked just fine. Lydia just being a single mom. And, you know, Charles Dietz is killed off because he goes on a trip and he basically gets like bitten in half by a shark. And the whole thing, the actor who plays Charles Dietz, of course, is like basically a registered sex offender. So, of course, they're not going to have him actually in this movie. And the way they kind of did his character of why you like don't see him because of like the shark bite is actually pretty clever. I thought that worked. There was a really funny part in this movie where, you know, when they're all in that, like, you know, the waiting room area and they're waiting forever for their number to be called. Like, and he like walks in and he sits down and like, it just shows like blood like slowly spewing like out of like the top half of his torso. And so when he goes to sit down, blood just like splurts onto the wall. And I thought that was pretty funny. It's kind of what kicks this whole thing off, is the death of Charles Dietz. And I mean, Delia Dietz, played by Catherine O'Hara, a really big positive of this movie is Catherine O'Hara is hilarious in this movie. She practically steals the show. I will say Michael Keaton is also another big highlight of this movie. He plays Beetlejuice really well once again. I do think there's some jokes that definitely didn't land as far as Beetlejuice goes, but like once this movie finally got going, like maybe 30-40 minutes in, that's when things kind of kicked up a little bit, and like the Beetlejuice-isms kind of came out, and like there was a couple gags that did get me, and I was definitely laughing a good bit. But there was a couple like gags where Beetlejuice like says something crazy happens. I was definitely getting cartoon Beetlejuice vibes from that. There's, you know, when Beetlejuice like first runs into Lydia for the first time, like he's like dressed up as like a therapist, and he's like, let's all spill our guts, and then Beetlejuice's like stomach literally like rips open and all these disgusting guts like come flying out, and I was just like, that is a literal cartoon Beetlejuice right there. And so that is, you know, a big positive. But like this, I'm a bit all over the place talking about my thoughts of this movie. I'm basically word vomiting everything, but that's how this movie is presented. It's just so much thrown at the wall to see what sticks, and a lot of it you didn't need. That's what's quite the disappointment about this. And it's like, I feel like Lydia was so underdeveloped as a character. Like, it felt like Winona Ryder was kind of playing Winona Ryder in a Beetlejuice sequel, not Winona Ryder as Lydia Dietz in the Beetlejuice sequel. Like, there's just mannerisms and stuff like in the original Beetlejuice from Lydia that's like, it just feel like it didn't even transfer into this movie. Like, it just didn't feel like you were watching the character of Lydia Dietz. And that's a big problem, at least in my opinion. Luckily, Michael Keaton like did a really good job as Beetlejuice in this movie, because it's like, if he didn't pull off Beetlejuice really well, this movie would have completely fallen apart. Like, the little positives I do have to say about this movie, like, it doesn't match up with all the negatives I have. And I have to mention, my wife is a Monster Beetlejuice fan, and she would like, you hear me complaining about this movie, she was really mad about this movie. Like, looked at me a number of times in this movie. I was just like, I eventually was like, are you okay? And she's like, no, I'm mad. I hate this. When you're a big Beetlejuice fan and you finally are getting a sequel to like one of your favorite movies, really nothing's going to measure up to that. But yeah, I mean, even for me, like, being a fan, and like, I went in with low expectations, because it's like, you know, most sequels that are just like, you feel like they aren't needed, and then it finally happens, you're just like, okay, you're not going to measure up to the original, obviously. But I did go into this movie just being like, you know what, that was fun. And I think some people are going to go into this movie and come out of it and be like, I had a good time with this movie. I really didn't. Honestly, like, yeah, the Monica Bellucci character of Dolores and Willem Dafoe's character, like those characters, like the whole movie is being built up as they're these big threats. And like by the time like it hits its big moment at the end, that like the resolution, it's just like these characters are taken out, no problem, like within a second. And I'm just like, you spent the entire movie building up these characters. Like Monica Bellucci's character is like known as a soul sucker. She's going all around the afterlife or the netherworld, like sucking out people's souls, and like they're literally like dying from like death in the afterlife, like, so they're just gone. Then you just like, she just like shows up at the very end of the movie, like runs into the church, and then like the sandworm gets like summoned and just like eats her immediately. And I'm like, all right, yeah, you just took her out of the movie like the second she had like a moment to make a big impact. It was like they weren't even together at all, like in this movie until the very end, and they had a confrontation for about 5 seconds. I feel like there was an angle with Catherine O'Hara's character of Delia Dietz where she bought these snakes that were supposed to be defanged, and then she like is recording some video of doing some ceremony for Charles Dietz, like at his gravesite, and then she like opens the container where these snakes are, and they immediately bite her in the neck and she dies. And I was like, I don't know how I feel about that, of just like, you killed off Charles Dietz already, and then you're killing off Delia Dietz already. It was just an odd choice to me, and I feel like they did that just to kind of give her something to do. And yeah, like she just kind of goes into the afterlife or the netherworld and is just kind of there, and then she's just not there. The whole Astrid storyline of like, you know, the mother-daughter like relationship could have worked really well, and they spent it on like all these B plot lines that just didn't matter in the end. Like once you got to the end of the movie, they didn't matter. And so yeah, you had this whole thing with like Astrid ends up running into her father like in the afterlife, you know, because he died from this boating accident and like was basically eaten by these fish. And yeah, like all the fish started just like pecking at his body all the time, and like they had this reunion, and he basically said goodbye to Astrid and was like have a great life. And it was like this guy was introduced like halfway through the movie, and then like they tried to like kind of develop him a little bit, and then they were just like, all right, see ya. I don't know, like this movie just had so much crammed into it that they tried to work, and for me, it just didn't. There's just like, the more I'm thinking about it, the less I'm like liking this movie. And like I came out of it just being like, that wasn't really that great. I mean, it was fine. And, you know, and then just the more I'm thinking about it, like I'm not liking this. The more I talk about it and the more I think about it. Part in the movie about Beetlejuice baby and whatever, and like especially the very end of the movie, there's this whole dream sequence with Lydia. She's dreaming that that Astrid is like getting married and they're having a kid, and she's giving birth, and then she gives birth to a Beetlejuice baby, and then like the Beetlejuice baby kills like the doctors helping her, and then Lydia wakes up and then sees Beetlejuice next to her, and he's like I just had the craziest dream. And then she also wakes up from that and was like, oh, there's no one next to me. And then the movie just ends. I feel like this movie is going to be successful. I went with a bunch of Kelly's family, so like we all went to the theater, and the theater was packed. Like we got out of our car and people were like stoked for this. Like someone dressed up in like Lydia's red wedding dress. Like someone was wearing a whole striped suit. So people were stoked for this movie, and I hope that like, you know, it didn't like, I wasn't happy about this movie, but I hope people leave watching this movie feeling good about it. That's like all I can hope for, because I don't really see myself going back and watching this again. And if I do, I'm not really paying attention to it, because I'm just going to remember just being like, you know, people waited, you know, an eternity for this, and it just really didn't come out all that great. I mean, all you had to do was just make a competent movie, and to me this was very incompetent. I think what worked so well in the original Beetlejuice is that it had its crazy zaniness, but it was very focused. It was focused a lot on Adam and Barb, and then the Dietzes moving into their house. And speaking of Adam and Barb, the whole explanation in this movie of why Adam and Barb aren't around, like, there's just like, they literally said, oh, they found a loophole and they moved on. And that's all that was said about Adam and Barb. And the fact that, like, they said that, I was thinking to myself, I'm like, you might as well not have just said anything or even mentioned Adam and Barb at all in this movie. I don't even know why they bothered with that. And I don't know if it was just a knock at, like, people, like, making a sequel to a movie and they're like, oh, well, what about these characters? Like, they didn't come back, so what do we do about that? And they're just like, oh, we'll just say they found a loophole in the Neither world and they moved on. And then I think even Jenna Ortega's character was like, whatever. And, like, that's pretty much how I felt. And also, just, yeah, just, you didn't even need to mention them. It's a double-edged sword. It's like you could have, like, people probably would have been wondering, be like, well, whatever happened to Adam and Barb? That was never answered. But, like, the answer you got was so lazy that it's like they might as well not even answer it. So I was not a fan of this movie. There was parts in this movie that definitely had the fall October vibe. There was, like, leaves all over the ground everywhere. There was scenes where just, yeah, leaves were everywhere. And this takes place like a couple days and on the night of Halloween. And yeah, I mean, that's me kind of grasping at straws here of, like, positives. I mean, I just really didn't care for this really at all. I just feel like I'm going to ramble about the same things, and I'm trying to just be like, these are the problems I had with the movie, and I think I pretty much listed everything of problems that I had. So as far as Beetlejuice, if they're going to make a third, I think this is going to be extremely successful, that they're probably going to make a third one. And of course they're going to title it Beetlejuice. But as far as interest goes, my interest will not be all that high if they make another sequel to this. Because I know, like, they finally made a sequel to Hocus Pocus. And it's like, Hocus Pocus 2, you know, I wasn't a big fan either. But I know it, like, really angered a lot of fans, and then I think they greenlit a third Hocus Pocus movie, so I'm sure some people's excitement for another Hocus Pocus movie is probably not all too high, because, yeah, I watched that, and I have not been like, oh, I want to go back and watch Hocus Pocus 2. Like, most people are like, just watch the first one. And, you know, unless you had, like, sequels, you know, in, like, as a plan, usually with something like this with Beetlejuice, where it was written as one story, you made it in 1988 and it's 2024 and you finally are like, all right, let's pull the trigger, let's make a sequel to Beetlejuice. It's still just, yeah, the whole plot of the movie was so convoluted that this needed a lot of work and revision on, in my opinion. So I will leave it at that, but I hope all of you have enjoyed Beetlejuice if you did go to see it. I am going to wrap it up here. My name is Brett, and give me a thumbs up on the video if you enjoyed my review. Subscribe to the channel. I am a very spooky guy. I like horror stuff as well. I also talk about some random stuff here and there. I happen to talk about wrestling randomly as well, so if that's up your alley, that's just a bonus. But if you come here for the spooky and horror reviews, I'm here for them. So, yep. Very loud car is driving by. Oh, it was a truck. I'm sorry. Okay. Well, that's enough for today. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you in a future video. Bye.